Welcome to the Single Era Diaries, exploring the journey of a woman who hasn't experienced what it's like to be single in her entire adult life, and pretty much most of her teenage life too. Each episode will navigate the journey of finding a sense of identity, exploring the challenges of co-parenting, finding love of self and healing, all whilst tackling the complexities of the checkered landscape of dating and dating apps, meeting new people, and operating solo in a world that celebrates couples, marriage, and codependency. I am your host, founder of Nascent Media and newly single woman, Jade Graham, and this is the diary of my single era. Figuring out connection, finding authentic connection, nurturing and enjoying it in dating and in new relationships. Gosh, this was one that I really wanted to get into because connection is so important. Like the feeling of, I get this person, they get me, like it just feels like the vibes are great. Like that's so important when you're in your single era. So I wanted to get into what connection means and why it's so vital when it comes to dating and relationships. From the relationships that might develop in your life organically, be that through your workplace, through friendships, through mutual connections, shared interests, to those that are found now in the digital world, the digital landscape, we're all online. Some might say those relationships are coming from a colder start, and I guess they are because they don't have that shared common ground, and the relationship is really starting much more by chance if you're on a dating app. There's timing, some might call it fate. I am in that club of the some who would call that fate, but in ordinary relationships, whether they are formed organically or whether they are formed through a dating app, how do you find what I believe we are all looking for, which is authentic, aligned, true to us, true to our values, true to who we are and what we believe in connection. And finding that connection that has the potential to go somewhere and to become something great. That's what I'll be getting into on this week's episode because, having authentic connection is arguably everything that matters, and it's at the core of our most important relationships. I personally describe connection as being just that really beautiful, but sometimes hard to find, hard to feel, hard to identify, the feeling of being on that same wavelength, of just getting each other, accepting each other for who you are, who they are, where you're at, what you're about, and just having what can feel at times electric but safe, nurturing but challenging. A lot like home in the greatest sense of what the word and feeling of home evokes to us. It's all of those things. We feel safe to experience all of those emotions and feelings in the safety and sanctity of our home, or at least we should. And that's what having an authentic connection feels like. As ever, the research, because I do like a bit of research, the research on authentic connections and what it means to have them echoes the sentiment. There's a psychotherapist called Pam Wilsey who authored a book called Packing for Success, a thrival guide for young women navigating life transitions. I'll link that in the show notes. But it describes authentic connections as having a connection with someone else where you can drop the facade, where you can feel safe in showing vulnerability, sharing who you are, showing who you are, your true and authentic self, warts and all. And that sounds incredible, right? I mean, that's arguably what we are all striving to have in the relationships that we enjoy in life and when seeking a romantic partner. It's vital to have in every relationship, especially when you're seeking out a romantic partner on the dating apps or in real life. So how do we find and nurture those authentic connections? Well, let's get into it. I guess it's important to understand and define what an authentic connection is. So, what is it? What is an authentic connection? Given that relationships do form the absolute foundation of our lives, having relationships that are built on honesty, trust, and authenticity is so critical. And the challenge, I found this as being a challenge, particularly when I was out in the dating landscape in the summer of last year. But the challenge in dating, especially online dating, where there isn't that shared common ground, and there's this online catalogue, or catalogues if you're signed up to multiple dating apps at one time, that are filled with thousands of profiles featuring not a great deal more than some pictures that are supposed to represent somebody's personality and what they do and who they're about. There's a few sentences to summarize what somebody's into, what they're looking for, and with all of that, there's all of these options. And so keeping sight of the importance of finding authentic connection, how is that possible? And then when in a relationship, actually maintaining that through the good times and not so good times. I mean, that's also pretty tough going. But I imagine that when we think about what an authentic connection is to us, it's not just a nice to have. And when we consider the science and the research into what authenticity is and human connections, what we understand about that is, in terms of what's happening in our brains and in our bodies, is when we connect authentically with somebody, we get this really lovely release of the hormone oxytocin. It's that lovely hormone that's described and known as being the love hormone or the love drug, which, if you aren't familiar with the term oxytocin, that might mean perhaps you're not a parent, because most of us parents who have gone through the process of having a child, we understand that oxytocin is that bonding hormone that we get with our child. So we have this sort of like this rush of oxytocin, just this absolute rush of love that we have for our child when we bring them into the world. And then through child rearing, we continue to have that. And that's really the hormone that's being produced in our brain that is promoting that feeling of bonding. It's promoting that feeling of love and nurturement and protection and trust. And we are also getting that when we are having those authentic connections. So we get this feeling of like really lovely warmth, adoration. It's a really lovely feeling, and it's not one that's limited to child rearing. It's not one that's limited just to romantic relationships. We also get this rush when we're in our other dynamics that are connecting authentically with us. That can be our friends, that can be our colleagues, that can be, a random pass by somebody in a coffee shop that you share a joyous laugh with. That feeling of oxytocin, that hormone in our brain, can be formed in all of those authentic connections as they happen. But the forming of that, when we are having those authentic connections, it's also linked to heaps of really positive behaviors that we exhibit as people in the relationships that we're having. And so things like generosity and empathy and collaboration and cooperation and just being a generally all-round nice person are the sorts of behaviours that show up when we are having this release of oxytocin. And of course, we're getting that when we're having those authentic connections. So in short, having that authenticity isn't only vital to us having the relationships, but it's also, it feels really good to us. And I think that's how we can sort of identify what is an authentic connection. It feels really good to us. It feels like we're in enjoyment, like we're in joy, literally in joy when we're having that connection. And I do believe that that's why when we are getting to enjoy those authentic relationships and those authentic connections, it does feel so good. But it's also conversely why when we're in a dynamic that isn't aligned with us. It's not authentically connecting with us. And that's not necessarily a reflection on the person. It could just be that they're a different vibration to us. We don't have those similar core magnetizing things that are sort of pulling us together, and the connection there is slightly off. So with it, the vibes are off as well. And I have got to say that when I, as mentioned earlier, when I found myself out in the dating landscape in the summer of last year, finding authentic connection was easily what I found to be most lacking in the majority of those online interactions. And then similarly in the first dates that I went on to endure, obviously not all of them, but in those that I did, that just that authentic, like, oh yeah, like we're on the same wavelength, that was not easy to come across, and that's why so few of those led to second dates. But I guess when you are putting yourself back out there into the dating landscape again, be that on the apps, be that in real life, be that just being, present in the notion that you want to meet somebody and you want to explore a relationship again, when you know how important having a connection is, an authentic connection, when you understand that and when you value it and you prioritize it, then if that connection isn't there, it feels all the easier to move on. And it is a case of being like, you know what, it was lovely to meet you, but this is just not clicking. And again, I believe that we all intuitively know when there is that click, when somebody's just on your level. And that is something that I think each of us can and should define for ourselves as part of our dating and relationship journey. And when it comes to actually finding those authentic connections, again, this is really down to us as individuals to be attuned to what aligns with us. So what is aligning with you? What makes you you? What makes you feel good? What do you enjoy? What have you learnt from your previous relationships that didn't work for you that you don't want to have happen again? What did work for you that somewhere along the line fizzled out and you really want to bring more of that and you want to focus on more of that? What are the things that you're into that kind of make you tick and that you would actually really like to share with the person that you're looking to build a relationship with? What are the things that are just important to you that you don't necessarily need to share so much, but you want to be given and granted the space to explore those things that you're into? I personally believe that it's so vital to get back to who you are before you put yourself back out there, to really be comfortable with what it is that makes you tick and to understand who you are authentically. And it's in doing that that will allow you to attract authentic connections to you. And that feeling, it really is this inner knowing. I wish I had more science to pack around this, and I'm sure there is, but for the purpose of this episode, I fundamentally believe that there's just this intuitive knowing. Like, we know when people are on our level and when they are right for us and when there is a click. And because I'm a massive hippie as well, and I am very spiritual, it's also my belief that the people who connect with us and the people that we align with and that we feel aligned with are simply destined to meet us. And that knowing or meeting somebody at whatever point of time in life just simply means that the universe wants us to do some work together, whatever that is, and that's why it really pays to be authentically ourselves, because then we are connecting and attracting to those who are also authentically aligned to whatever that self is. I fully appreciate, of course, that there are those who are perhaps a little more cynical to the beliefs that I have, or just prefer something a little bit more robust by way of explanation into identifying what connection entails. So I do have a little bit more sort of context around that if you are a bit more of a cynic. So what to look out for when it comes to identifying connection? Well, here is, I think, a fairly robust and comprehensive series of things to identify. And if you notice some or all of the following elements, with the person that you are dating or have embarked on a relationship with, or things are moving in a good direction, if you have these things going on, then you're on to a pretty great thing. So the first one really is about being yourself, and I really advocate for being yourself, your authentic self, showing up as who you are, warts and all, the great and the good and the bad, all of it. And yes, I accept that we do all have a mask to some extent. We do have personas that we adopt perhaps in different ways and different scenarios. And yes, we might not behave in our office in quite the same way as we do in our home. But that said, being who we are throughout all of those interactions is something that is fundamentally vital and crucial. We have to show up as ourselves. Naturally, when we first meet someone, when we're first out there dating, when you're getting to know somebody, yes, we're typically on our best behaviour. Of course we are. Of course we're showing up as the best version of ourselves, but it's still ourselves. And I think when you are looking for, is this authentic? When you feel like you can be yourself, and when you're comfortable as the dates progress, that the best version of yourself, like, that's great, and the most polished version, that's great. But as time goes on and those first dates morph into second and third and beyond, that what you're looking for is for yourself and for the other person to be showing more of just them, the laughter, the silly bits, the daft bits, the fumbles, the tripping up on something, the, stubbing your foot as you walk into something, the having a bit of a panic attack. I've had that on a date where I was just so flustered. And it's just, that's part of one of the things that I deal with. And I think the fact that I could expose that in front of that person meant that I was clearly being myself, kind of warts and all. I was having a bit of a hot flustery thing. Maybe the things that you like, there could be things about you that you consider to be, or you've been told in the past, sort of like nerdy or geeky, or maybe you believe that you have to have a perfect body. Like, that's definitely a big one for me. I have a very big challenge with the fact that my body is not my pre-baby body. And so feeling comfortable and being myself and just dealing with the fact that I don't have a perfect body these days and I've got a bit of a mum tum, that is part of being yourself. Not feeling the need to wear like a full face of makeup, just, being comfortable with kind of just kicking back a little and relaxing and feeling at ease. Like, these are all really, really important. If you can relax into being you and you feel comfortable in doing that, even if it includes sort of morning breath and an addiction to Disney soundtracks and a snort when you laugh, then that is a really good sign that this is an authentic connection. If you feel comfortable in being yourself, your full authentic self, warts and all. Intimacy feeling natural and undaunting is so very important. This is really a great sign that this is a great connection, because I just want to be clear for a moment and really emphatic about the importance of intimacy in adult relationships and how vital it is to feel comfortable when reaching the stages of being physically intimate with another person. Because yes, it's absolutely critical. It's absolutely critical in romantic connections to have that physical connection and to be physically attracted, and to have sexual chemistry is like the gift that keeps on giving. If you've got that in a relationship, if you've got that in this connection, then that's so important. And it's a much bigger core component of actually building and maintaining an authentic connection. To the extent that I really do believe that if that element of your relationship is off, if it's been lost, then it doesn't mean that all bets are off, but it definitely means that there's some work to do, because sharing intimacy is a really core part of a relationship. And if that physical intimacy feels natural, if it flows, if it feels electric, then that's fantastic. If you feel undaunted by the vulnerability that comes with being physically intimate, gosh, that's a big one. Especially if as mentioned, you have a bit of a mum tum like me, and you're like, oh my gosh, my body is not perfect, and you're able to get past that to just really experience and enjoy the moment, then that is so key. Let's remember though, intimacy isn't only physical intimacy, because it's also the overall intimacy, which, as connection would have it, is created intellectually, emotionally, through shared interests, through shared experiences, through passions, and physically. And if you've got the blend of all of those elements, then that connection is really authentic, and it's a great sign to carry on investing. The next is being part of each other's lives, or building up to become more of each other's lives. And I kind of caveated that, because what I personally know to be true as a mother to a young daughter, and I'm sure there's so many other mothers or dads, if you're listening, who have got young children, and you absolutely know that the unraveling of the partnership, if you were in a relationship that was established with the parent of your child, you will understand that has had, on some level, either sort of known or unknown, it's impacted your child in some way. And what's absolutely critical is to protect our children, not to only protect our own hearts, but also to protect the hearts and the minds of our young little humans who we are responsible for taking care of. And what that means is, when it comes to opening up the parts of our lives to the person that we're connecting with, there is this desire to want to share all of that, and that can come quite quickly, or it might come a little bit later. But interestingly, the research says if you do have kids, that kind of opening up that person to your child is really good to entertain around sort of like the 6 months onwards point, because I guess by that point in time you've established whether things are, kind of stable, and you know that there's going to be a little bit more comfort in not sort of introducing your child to somebody that isn't going to be there sort of on an ongoing basis. So whilst being part of each other's lives is a really great sign of the connection being authentic and it going somewhere, it is important to acknowledge that in a lot of adult dating relationships where there are children involved, where there are family members who are involved, that it's not necessarily something that you can do quite as quickly as you could do in your 20s or 30s, where you might just interconnect and intermesh in each other's lives really quickly, and you're kind of living in each other's pockets really quickly. Like, that doesn't necessarily happen in quite the same way. So whilst there might not be that complete exchanging participation in each other's lives, and that might not happen for several months if you've got kids, or even if you haven't, it doesn't mean that you can't, in the connection that feels authentic to you, it doesn't mean that you can't invest time in talking about what your intentions are. And that will again come at varying stages. Relationships develop over time, and a couple of months in is something you might be talking about it, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to happen. And then if you're not a parent, then the integration into each other's lives in all aspects can perhaps happen more quickly. But crucially, feeling happy and comfortable with the prospect of meeting each other's people, learning more about the important people in your person's life, the interests that they have, the work that they do, the home that they explore, the relationships that they have outside of your relationship. If you're comfortable with, talking about that and sharing that, that's a really great sign. Easily, if you find yourself sharing an insight or an overview into the person that you're dating or that you've begun a relationship with, if you're sharing details and information about the time that you're spending and how good it is, and people are noticing that you're much happier and less grumpy, which is definitely something that's happened to me. People are like, it's really nice to see you so happy. But if you find that you're sharing just an insight into who this person's going to be, if you're kind of setting them up to meet this person, then that is another really great indicator of authenticity in the connection. If you care about the other person's needs and wants and desires, and you want the best for each other, that's also so important. I really firmly believe that when any connection is meaningful, when a connection is authentic with someone, you care about what's important to them. You care about what could be bothering them. You care about what they're interested in. You care about what matters to them in their lives and what could be presenting a challenge, what might be easy. And you have this preparedness to meet your person halfway, to hold space for the things that they might be experiencing as a challenge. Essentially, you're able to place the needs of your person as a priority in the same way that you are doing with your own things. So it's essentially not all about you. It's about acknowledging that there's things that are important to the other person, and that could be time, it could be hobbies, it could be space, it could be ex-partners, it could be co-parenting, it could be time with their child, it could be they might really be into base jumping, and that's something that they have to go and do like every other weekend. Like, it's caring about those things, not to the extent that you necessarily join in with base jumping, but that you are really prepared to hold space and not to try and encroach on that. You're supportive of the things that that person has going on. You care about your person's needs, wants and desires, and you want the best for them. And if you find yourself doing that willingly, wanting to do that, if it feels easy and it comes naturally, then this is a connection that's worthwhile investing or continuing to invest in. If you can balance that connection though, and you can also balance having space from each other, so embracing balance, embracing personal space, I mean, this is really so crucial. It's so healthy. It's so healthy to do that. It is perfectly natural to have time apart. I'm going to say that again. It's perfectly natural to have time apart. I wish I would have known this in my 20s and my 30s. I clearly did not. But in fact, when you are dating as a full grown-up human, and you've got kids, and you've got a career, and you've got a house, and you've got bills, and you've got friends, and you've got a life, like you have a whole life that's going on before you even know that this other person exists. And you know, that's your life outside of it. You've got your own friendships. You've got your own activities. You've got your own things that you want to do. Maintaining that, maintaining your individuality and your interests, your friendships, your activities, it's so important. It's so important in all relationships, but especially in new ones. What you really want to avoid doing is to merge to the extent that you lose who you are. Because your connection, when it's authentic, is based on who you are as an individual, connecting with that other person. And if you forgo who you are, if you give up the aspects of what makes you you, then you're missing out on the joy of preserving the very thing that attracted you to each other in the first place. Individuality contributes to the overall growth and the independence of your growing relationship into that of a couple. And so maintaining that, your individuality, having the trust and the belief that the space isn't going to alter anything, knowing that you can not see each other for a few days, because again, you know, a lot of the internet discourse on when you're dating, if people are that into you, you're speaking to them every day, you're seeing them every day, you're seeing them like 3-4 times a week. Like, no, when you're a fully grown adult and you have come from a relationship and you have some baggage that involves kids and a life, like, you can't see each other every day. You have entire worlds that you are managing in your own respective quarters, and you're dealing with that. And you as much as you might really want to, you're really yearning to like just spend, I'd love to spend every single waking second with this person, but you can't, because you're a grown-up and you've got to work and you've got a child to feed. And if you're like myself, oftentimes you're just being a snack person and an entertainer and, you know, all of that good stuff. So look, maintaining the balance is really key. If you can, in addition to all of those things, if in this authentic connection, if you can also happily compromise, having a willingness to compromise is truly fundamental, again, in all relationships, but especially when you're starting out, you're dating, you're getting to know somebody, you're embarking on a new relationship, you have to be able to compromise. More so if you are a fully grown adult. Like, you can't just do the things that you want to do. It's really frustrating. I think it's part and parcel of actually being a grown-up, especially when you've got kids. Like, you can't just do what you want to do. So it's unrealistic to expect your person to be in complete agreement on everything with what you want to do. Now, ideally, if you've got this authentic connection, that you're going to have, similar interests, things that you're into, that you both share, fantastic. But no matter how much you share in common with your partner, if either you or the person you're dating or in a relationship with, if you're consistently insisting on having your own way, or they're insisting on having their own way, that's an indication that there's either some work needing to be done here, things aren't being respected, there's some work to do. It might even be a case of going, whoa, this is not working, because you have to compromise. Compromise is absolutely critical. So shared common ground, commitment to compromise, making space for each other's needs, they are really key indicators. If you're happy to do that, if you're happy to bend to what the other person needs. So one of the things that I need is, I like a text message. I really value the fact that my person is texting more than they would probably like to. I appreciate that. A lot. Equally, there's things that I will go do that, maybe I wouldn't necessarily go watch football. I mean, I probably would, but I will do it a lot more now, because it's it's about compromise. It's about doing the things that make the other person feel good and let them know that you care enough to compromise. So that's really important too. If you're able to prioritize enjoyment, laughter, fun, if the person that you're dating or you're in a relationship with can bring a smile to your face effortlessly, if you can laugh together, if you can share that, if you can enjoy the time that you're spending together, if it feels easy, if the time goes quickly, if there's moments of laughter, there's moments of playfulness, you find joy in each other's company. This can be, it doesn't have to be grand. You don't have to be in a Michelin star restaurant. You can be running an errand together. You can be hanging out on the sofa. You can be grabbing a coffee. You can be walking down a high street, speaking on the phone, just talking. Doesn't matter what it is that you're doing. But if there's an aspect of true joy in the time that you're spending together, and you're able to prioritize those moments, that doesn't only strengthen the connection that you have together, but it also adds something special to the connection that you share, and it's a connection that is authentic. So look, how do you find this connection? If you're out there in the dating world, how do you find it? I'm going to be honest, I really do believe that it starts as ever with us. It starts with us. It starts with us being our authentic selves. It starts with us showing up authentically for who we are, knowing what makes us tick, knowing what we want, what we don't want, being comfortable with our eccentricities, our emotional self, our flawed self, the best bits, the tough bits. How are we when we're grumpy? What happens when we have a bad day? If we're comfortable with all of those aspects and we know where we need to do the work, but we also know what's pretty great about us, if we understand and accept these parts of ourselves, then we're going to attract somebody that's aligned with us. If we're not authentic, if we somehow believe that watering down our personality or what it is that we want from life, or not being true to what we think or we care about, then how on earth can we expect to connect authentically with someone else if we're not connecting authentically to ourselves? And what I must say on this, I do believe this is why, before we put ourselves out there to find a connection again, when we've come out of a relationship that has fallen apart or unraveled or grown apart or just imploded, whatever that is, we owe it to ourselves to take the time to heal, to go inwards, to recalibrate, to become our individual selves again, to find out who we are again, because this can be lost. When you're in a relationship for some time, you can somehow shaft yourself into becoming a version of yourself that isn't actually you. If you started out in a relationship when you're younger, or it was perhaps before you had children, then the version of who you were might not be who you are now. And going back out into the world to meet somebody again, and from my own experience, doing that, to do that authentically, you need to peel back the layers of who you are and the parts that were hidden or lost or shrunk or damaged, and just need a little bit of time to kind of recalibrate and re-ruffle again and to come back out and to just feel comfortable with all that. You need to have that in order to attract an authentic relationship. You need to be you. So it starts with you. And in doing so, that's when you will prioritize what it is that you need and what it is that will work for you and what it is going to be worthwhile investing time in. And the connections that show up, you will feel much more empowered to say, yeah, that fits, that works. Or no, please do not contact me again. But in being authentic with ourselves, then yeah, that's when I don't think we find those connections when we're authentic about ourselves. I think those connections find us. I think they show up. I think they show up the moment that we start being who we really are. And it is, again, when you least expect it. So when you find authentic connection, building on the relationship as it develops, yeah, it requires vulnerability. It requires a willingness to be present, to put yourself in the other person's shoes, to listen. It's about having a willingness to share how you feel, what you're thinking, even when it's not fully comfortable doing so. And like the esteemed and wonderful thought leader, Dr. Brené Brown, shared in her TED Talk on vulnerability, at the very center of what a meaningful human experience is vulnerability at its core. And to build and nurture on an authentic connection into a meaningful relationship requires that we are open and honest with ourselves and with our person, to acknowledge our imperfections, to acknowledge our vulnerabilities, and to create a safe space for our person to do the same. And that's ultimately what being in a relationship with somebody is fundamentally all about. So whatever stage of dating or established relationship you're at, be true to yourself. Be authentically you at all times, and those authentic connections will find their way to you. Thank you for listening as ever, and peace out. Catch you next week. The Single Era Diaries is produced and distributed by Nascent Media and executive produced by me, Jade Graham. Podcasts grow by being liked and shared, so if you enjoyed today's show, then please be sure to like and share with a friend who you think will enjoy the show too. Subscribe, and if you have a moment to rate and review wherever it is that you listen to your podcast, that would be super appreciated too. Thank you for listening, and peace out.